Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Seth. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about an issue that I think a lot of real estate investors of all kinds tend to overlook. And that issue has to do with whether your property is located in or anywhere near a flood zone. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't pay any attention to because, for the most part, flooding is something that doesn't happen often, or at least it doesn't affect us personally. We might hear about it or see it on the news, but most people can't say that like they have personally been affected by a flood. So it kind of just falls by the wayside. We don't pay a lot of attention to it. But it still matters, and it's still important for you to be aware of the situation, because whether there are already improvements on that property, or say if you're looking at a piece of vacant land and you think that someday there might be something built on that property, pretty much any lender out there who lends money and takes this property as collateral is going to care about whether that property is in a flood zone. And if it is in a flood zone, it's probably safe to assume that they're going to force you to have flood insurance on that property. And why would they do that? Because if at any point during the life of the loan, a flood hits that property and destroys it, you better believe that matters to them, and they want to be prepared for that. And the problem with flood insurance is that depending on where your property is located, what kind of flood zone it's in, if at all, it could potentially be very, very expensive to maintain flood insurance on that property on an annual basis. And even if you're somebody like me who typically buys properties free and clear and there's nobody forcing you to get flood insurance, even then, it's still important to know about this because in the future, if you end up selling this property to somebody else and they need a mortgage or some kind of loan, and then their lender forces them to get flood insurance, that is potentially something that would make them walk away from the deal as well. So you can't just ignore this. This is something you really want to be aware of, one way or another, what the situation is in terms of whether or not it's located in or anywhere near a flood zone. So how exactly do you go about verifying this? Well, I'm going to show you an example from my own life. When I was just getting out of college, my wife and I bought our first house right here in this neighborhood that we're looking at. The interesting thing about this neighborhood was that there was a little creek that ran through it, which you can kind of see if you follow the mouse. Sort of goes over here and up around there, and you can just sort of see where that water goes. And every single year around the time that winter was ending and spring was just around the corner, all the snow would melt and the water level of this creek would go like way, way, way high, like flooding the nearby sidewalks and sometimes even getting in the road. Just on the average year, you could always expect the water level to rise significantly. And I remember thinking back then, man, I wonder if this river has ever just had a massive flood and gotten water all over this neighborhood. Like, I wonder if that's happened, and if so, which of these houses were affected by that. And it's actually pretty easy to figure out what the situation is here, and I'm going to show you a couple resources online, both of which are free, that can help you figure out if there's a flood zone that affects your property. So the first one here is on the FEMA website, and this is, run and maintained by the US government. So for the most part, they have flood maps that cover most of the places that are going to affect you if you're buying properties in the United States. So all you got to do is go here. I'm going to include a link to this page beneath this video if you want to come check it out. And whatever the longitude and latitude coordinates are, or the address of the property is, you just go ahead and enter it in here. And I actually know of a specific house that happens to be right by this river. It's the house that's right here, if you can see that. So I'm going to punch that address in here and we'll go check it out. And what it's going to do is it's going to show us this map right here. And if it has a digital map, it's going to show you right there. In this case, there is no such information. But what you can do is click here and go check out the most recent up-to-date PDF that they have on file. And you can check out how that looks. And what this does here is it shows you this map. And we can zoom in on where we're looking. So we're going to zoom in right here. You kind of have to eyeball it to figure out where your property is in relation to the body of water that you're looking at. So if we go back to this map here on Google Earth, you can sort of see where the river runs, how it curves around here like that. And then if we go back here to this PDF and keep zooming in, we can see that same curve going right over here. So This spot right here on the map, right at that corner, is the same thing as this spot right here on Google Earth. And as you can see, according to this map anyway, that property is pretty squarely inside of a A4 flood zone. So what does that mean? Is that like a serious problem? Well, there's another thing I'm going to show you. And again, I'll link to this below. If we go here to this PDF from the USDA, there's actually several different places on the internet that say pretty much the same thing as this, but it says right here that there was apparently an old format. They used to designate flood zones by A1 through A30, so given that this is A4, it kind of falls within that category. Basically what this is saying is that currently this would be called an AE flood zone. And according to floodmaps.com, an AE flood zone is essentially an area that has a 1% annual chance of flooding. Or in other words, it's in the 100-year floodplain. So every 100 years approximately, you can expect some kind of flood to affect this area. That's obviously just a really good thing to be aware of. And there's actually another website out there called floodtools.com. I think from what I've seen of this site, it seems a little bit more like up-to-date and current and just like user-friendly, easy to use. And all you got to do on this website is just plug in whatever address you're looking for, click on go, and then it's going to take you to that address on the flood map. And what this does is kind of like in real time, it will show you the same kind of map with a red outline of where the current flood zones are. One interesting thing to note about this particular neighborhood that I'm telling you about is that when we were living there, they actually built up a berm around this river that was not there previously. And essentially what that berm does is it keeps the floodwaters back. So it essentially improved the situation for this neighborhood here so that it is not as affected as it was previously. It's not quite as vulnerable. And that's something that I do not believe is reflected in this map, because this particular map is a little bit older. Looks like this thing was put together in 1982. So while this is helpful, in this particular case, it would be more helpful to have something that's more up to date, which I believe floodtools.com can deliver a little bit better value there. So say if we want to zoom in a little bit closer here, it looks like that flood zone is definitely smaller now. It's not quite as big as it was before, but nonetheless, our property is still located well within that area. But if we go back and compare it to this one, we can see that that area has gotten substantially smaller than it was before. I'm going to link to this website as well, but obviously it's pretty easy, just floodtools.com, and you can check that out. And then lastly, let's say you're looking at a property like this and it's shown pretty clearly that you are in a flood zone. Well, if you want, you can go here and click on get a flood insurance quote. I'm not entirely sure where this is pulling the numbers from. I guess I can only assume there's some affiliation with American Bankers Insurance Company of Florida, but in any event, if you want to just get an idea for what it might cost you to get flood insurance, or for that matter, what it might cost a future home buyer or landowner for them to get flood insurance, you can go ahead and click here to just sort of specify what your situation is and just say whatever kind of scenario you're looking at, and click on this, click on all this stuff, and then click on continue. And then it's just going to show you pretty clearly some of the potential costs you could expect to pay per year, depending on how much insurance you need and what you need it for. And as you can see, the numbers here are not like crazy expensive, but it's also not necessarily cheap. I mean, if I had to pay an extra $500 a year for something, I mean, that's not insignificant. I probably want to know about that. And I'm sure there are a lot of places in the world and probably other states where flooding is a much bigger problem, where these numbers could be astronomical. So if you happen to see pretty clearly that you are located in a flood zone, then definitely call around to a few flood insurance agents and, try to get some quotes and see how much you're going to have to pay. Or you can come to a website like this just to get a ballpark estimate. And again, this is not a guarantee of what you might end up paying. This is just to give you a basic idea of what it might cost. But if you need any precision, then obviously you'll want to do a Google search for like flood insurance agent near me or something like that, and give them a call and find out exactly what they would charge for your particular situation. So that's pretty much it. I hope you guys found this somewhat helpful. I know between the FEMA website and websites like Flood Tools, I use one or the other or both on pretty much every property that I purchase, just to make sure I understand what I'm getting before I buy it. Thanks again for watching, and I wish you all the best as you're doing your property research.